both Kellon and I do some photography, Kellon quite a bit of video as well. So it's mostly going to be an annotated slideshow just to kind of share our experience. We'll open it up to kind of questions at the end as well. So as Amy mentioned, this trip in particular happened last November, and we had done some previous trips kind of exploring Cabo area and made some contacts down there that encouraged us to come back and explore the Sardine run that happens in the fall every year up in Magdalena Bay, which is quite a bit further north from Plain and Cabo. It's about a 6-hour drive through pretty barren desert. Not a lot else happening in that area, but it's a very kind of quaint fishing village. Oops. I just shouldn't touch the computer. Thanks, Don. We can go back on you. So this is kind of zoomed in on Magdalena Bay here. It's quite large, actually. So this bay is a massive protected area and has a very interesting history. Because of how large and deep the bay is, it has consistently been used as kind of a nursery and a migration station for a lot of gray whales and other whale species. That also means that it has a little bit of a dark history in whale fishing. So that was actually still very prevalent in Magdalena Bay until about, I think it was in 1949, is when the whaling moratorium started. There were some seasons, late 1800s, where they estimate over 1,200 whales were slaughtered in that bay in 1 year. So since that has ceased, there has been this incredible rebound of biodiversity in that bay. There's still quite a lot of fishing happening there. Not all of it sustainable. Of course, the locals need to make a living, but there is a lot of bycatch. So every day, kind of going into the boatyard, getting ready to go out, we would encounter scenes like this, where we see sometimes even leopard sharks and a lot of species that we love to see as divers, just kind of thrown away for the dogs to eat. Oh, no. There's quite a lot of shrimp fishing. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Shrimp fishing. There's, of course, sport fishing. That's not so unsustainable. It's still not something that we love. We like to see everything from underwater. There is actually still a camp there where I don't know how much of it's still prevalent, but there is still some shark finning as well. So there's still, it's a massive biodiverse area, and the locals in the past have always sustained themselves on fishing. Here we actually have some local shrimp fishermen. In the back there, that's actually a sardine canning facility. So every year around the fall, there's a massive sardine run. I don't really call it a migration because it's not necessarily understood what makes sardines move, but that movement of the sardines. Sorry, what was that?
It's mostly upwelling.
Upwelling, yep. When the sardines start to move, it brings in a lot of predators. There has been a nice shift, though, in recent years in Magdalena Bay, which is largely what brought us there. Kellon can actually talk a little bit more on what's happening there now and kind of the shift from a lot of unsustainable fishing.
So a lot of the, like Drew mentioned, like back in the day, there used to be a whaling camp, and then that whaling camp is kind of shifted to a shark finning camp. And it basically depleted this whole area of a lot of the biodiversity that was there before, until one or two guys started to realize that you could start to bring people out into the bay to actually view these animals instead of actually fishing them, and started making a pretty good profit off of it. So a lot of the other locals in the area have actually started coming in and replicating their model. And from there, a lot of the life has actually started to return. Our whole goal of going down there was actually seeing the striped marlin. And while the numbers are actually down there right now, but it's slowly transitioning into more of a sustainable place, just because the fishermen realize that instead of fishing these animals, you can actually start to make more of a profit by actually bringing people out to see these animals. So the whole area is actually a pretty good model for conservation success. It's a pretty fascinating area, along with the whales, since that's actually kind of been depleted over the years. This is Fernanda Nieto. This is basically how we got connected with the area. I first met her down in June. I basically call her the orca whisperer. If you want to go get in the water with killer whales, I swear she gets in the water basically weekly with these animals. And that's how I initially met her, because that was kind of my goal. So we basically did a trip with her in June. And then she basically told us about this whole marlin trip and sardine run, got us hooked, and immediately got us back. But she's kind of the present generation of this local community that was, kind of took off on ecotourism rather than fishing depleting the waters. She's kind of, in my mind, the pinnacle of the model of that, like, kind of works in conservation, of showing people these animals rather than, overfishing them and depleting the area.
She's got quite a lot of influence down there. And one of the things that she was really sharing with us that makes Magdalena Bay and what's happening there so unique is that a lot of this shift to ecotourism is actually being driven by the locals versus outsiders like us. So that's a really, really, sheds a lot of optimism on the situation there, and hopefully worldwide as well. So our trip, it was just 4 days in the water, 4 long, exhausting days. So I'll walk you guys kind of through the itinerary of what that day-to-day looked like. And then we're going to just really start sharing some of our highlights and a lot of the media that we captured underwater. So as I mentioned, long days. We have to go Magdalena Bay, quite large. So it takes about an hour just to get out of the bay on one of these small pangas. So these small boats only hold about 6, maybe 8 people, depending on how large individuals are. But every morning we were at the boatyard before sunrise, and we'd get loaded up and start motoring out of the bay. Like I said, it took about an hour to cross. It was usually pretty chilly that time of year in the morning. But before we exited the bay and potentially into some bigger waves, we would all kind of stop, get our wetsuits on. We would stay in those wetsuits for probably the next 8 hours at least. Yeah, it was a lot of action. So as soon as we start making our way out of the bay, the captains start looking for birds. To be specific, they're looking for frigates. So why are they looking for the birds? Well, when these sardines start coming, predators like the striped marlin, sea lions, even whales will feed off of them. All these large predators drive the sardines up to the surface, where it's a lot easier to feed off of them. The birds, seabirds, especially frigates in this area, take huge advantage of that, and they'll swoop down and grab sardines right at the surface when they're pushed up by the other predators in the water. So we immediately start looking for the birds. It's quite exciting. There's a lot of, a little bit of suspense in the morning. How far are we going to have to go? How long are we going to have to search? I would say we got really fortunate all 4 days. It was just nonstop action. There's a lot happening. We were anywhere from, I think, 6 to 20 plus miles offshore. But these boats can move pretty quick, and the water was always calm. We had great conditions. So when we find the birds, we never really know what's going to be there. The captains kind of approach slowly. And they have so much experience reading the water because a lot of these tour guides, a lot of these captains are experienced fishermen. They made the shift. So they know how to read the water. We had a couple occasions where our captain took us away from other boats, seemingly headed in the wrong direction, no birds, but he found a bait ball with no birds on it. He couldn't see that. None of us could see that from the surface. So you never really know what's going to happen. We get ready when the captain tells us. We're in the water right away. And sometimes we just stumble upon a small bait ball of sardines, largely maybe already been feasted upon, not much there. Sometimes the action's a little bit more intense. So there were some large bait balls. Wow. We also never really knew if those bait balls would be static or dynamic, whether they were going to kind of work with us and stay still. I would say a good 60% of the time, maybe more. You get off the boat, you see some fast action, and if you're not constantly moving in pursuit of that action, you're gonna miss it. But occasionally we would get lucky on a static bait ball where the bait ball kind of just stays in one spot, and we could just hang back and observe the feeding frenzy that was happening. So in addition to striped marlin every single day, we also saw sea lions. Often they would be feeding together, but usually if a large group of sea lions came in, the marlin would back off a little bit. They're not huge fans of other big mammals. But for the most part, if we kept our distance, then we could observe all this natural behavior and natural interactions amongst some of these apex predators, which is really cool.
What's great about the sea lion is they basically love us because we scare the marlin away, and then the sea lion basically capitalize on us scaring them away.
So again, action packed. Most of the marlin that we saw were about half the size of their potential growth. Striped marlin can reach up to 12 feet in length. They can be 450 plus pounds. We definitely saw some big boys, but not quite to that extent. They survive on a diet of sardines, mackerel, anchovies, basically all of your pelagic schooling bait fish. But they'll also, I mean, they're opportunistic feeders. They'll feed off of any invertebrates or squid. Let's see, what do we have next? Yeah. Speaking of invertebrates,
Oh, cute.
I find myself asking Fernanda, our guide, quite a lot. Okay, if they feed off invertebrates, what does that look like out in the open ocean? Well, here's a great example. We actually did stumble upon a very small pelagic crustacean. I mean, probably about this big. And they spend most of their life in the water column. So you know, you can see kind of all the hairs around the legs there, but they can just stay neutral in the water column and feed off of all the zooplankton. So it's really cool to actually see one of those. I kept wondering if a marlin was going to come grab it right in front of me. Unfortunately not. A lot of really cool behavior that we got to witness as well. So when the marlin are not really feeding, it's almost like they have this hierarchy in the water. At any time we might have, 20 to maybe 100 marlin. Sometimes very deep in the water column, you never really knew how many were there because we couldn't see all of them. Wow. But generally the ones that were a little deeper and weren't feeding, their colors were muted, that dorsal fin was down. And again, it's not completely understood, but it is considered to be like a response to any stimulant. So when they feed, typically we'll see that dorsal fin go up and they start flashing those really vibrant stripes. So we got to see that a lot close to the surface. There's another example. That one's pretty vibrant. I mean, absolutely gorgeous, super gorgeous fish. I think Kellon.
Yeah. So basically just kind of the highlight reel trip at this point. Like Drew said, like some days you would show up and you might see 5 marlin, but there could be hundreds around you. This day we jumped in, I mean, as far as you could see, there were marlin all around. They basically, whenever they hunt, they're usually solitary whenever they're on their own. They group together to basically rile up the fish, and kind of like a wolf pack, they'll basically start corralling fish into that ball and then just start darting up from the depths and picking fish off one by one. And that's a whole bunch of different hunting strategies to kind of get that done.
Did you say humming?
Hunting.
Did it make noises like bubble net?
No, not quite like humpbacks. But it's cool if they did. So speaking of hunting strategies, they actually use that beak. So they actually will stab, they'll skewer, slice. I think one of the terminology when you look it up is fiddling. So they'll just go back and forth, just basically divert a fish off the bait ball so they can isolate it and hunt it. It's not completely obvious in this photo, but you can actually see the fish that's cut in half.
Oh my
God. Right there. So we got to see it a couple of times. You got to really look out for it. But they actually use that beak as a sword. It's pretty fascinating.
Seen that happen a couple of times, and you could actually like grab or see a half of the fish. It was a clean cut, like a chef knife.
Yeah. I wish I would have like I didn't include the photo, but I have one photo that basically it looks like a galaxy of stars after the fish moved on, and it's just a barrage of scales that are just left behind after these guys have been here.
From the marlin over fish.
The fish that the marlin were hunting, basically, they chopped them up so much that the scales were just floating in the water column, and it's just everywhere.
That picture must be pointless.
Yeah. One of the funny facts that Fernando always points out is these guys kind of look like old grumpy men. Whenever you're looking at them head on, especially when they're chewing like on a fish, it's pretty funny. I just thought that was a pretty interesting perspective of that. It's just another photo to kind of see how they kind of corral the bait ball. They basically will just move in all different directions to kind of keep it contained. But this is an example where basically the bait ball's starting to get away from him. But this is another one of our highlight days where basically everywhere you look, it's just marlins upon marlins. Those are all the fish.
There's a
Oh,
sea
right
lion.
here? It's probably sea lion, yeah. The sea lion really like to capitalize on the marlin's failure. So they just sit in the middle of the bait ball, and when the marlin don't succeed, they just get a chow.
How long are those sardines?
They're probably about, good 4 inches.
Yeah.
They do hunt, like, the last trip we were on in June before this, we got to get in the water with mackerel. And they're quite a bit longer, and so it's quite a bit more intensive a bait ball.
Some of these are mackerel. They're 10 to 12 inches, maybe even. There were a couple bait balls that were a little bit larger.
So just doubling back on kind of their coloration. This is probably the biggest marlin I saw down there. He was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 feet, but just obviously very well fed. But you can see, like, fins up. It was just going in for, picking off one of these fish. You can see how vibrantly, like, well lit up his stripes are. Otherwise, if he was just swimming, he wasn't hunting, that fin would be down and all his colors would be pretty dull. So it's pretty interesting just to see it.
So they just take one at a time? Or do they like travel them up like a few lines?
I think from what we saw, it was usually one at a time.
Yeah, usually go in one at a time. I've seen it like just going through our photos. You can kind of see like one's hitting here and then another one's kind of picking another fish off in the background. I think it's just whoever is lucky enough to like get a fish diverted off the bait ball. They do it in a coordinated way, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. They're very coordinated and very uncoordinated at the same time. So, they are extremely fast. They're one of the like them, swordfish, marlin, sailfish. They're classified as some of the fastest fish. When you look up the numbers, everybody's got a different number about how fast these fish actually go. I've found anywhere between 50 to 70 mile an hour through the water. They're some of the fastest fish in the sea. So you just see kind of that push behavior. Whenever you're in the water, your guide basically puts everybody on one side of the bait ball, because basically if you're surrounding the bait ball, you screw up the entire hunting pattern. And then basically the bait ball just disperses, the marlin disappear. So this is an example where we were all on one side of the bait ball and the marlin just pushed all the fish directly towards us.
So were these mackerel or sardines?
I think these guys are mackerel, just looking at the size of them. I can't keep the bait fish straight, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth talking about, is how we actually were in the water, because it wasn't just to not alter the behavior of the species there, but also for safety. If you have everyone surrounding this bait ball and you have marlin darting in with that bill, there are injuries that happen. So keeping everyone on the same side, the marlin know where we are, we know where the marlin are.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite photos I've ever taken.
He's like, looking at you.
A little bit. So basically what happens is sometimes when you have a camera, like cameras emit, an electromagnetic pulse out of them and that the fish get attracted to. This is kind of my theory of why I basically got surrounded by these little guys. Like sometimes they'll break off of the bait ball and kind of use you as like kind of a hiding platform from the marlin. And for some reason, they were just extremely attracted to me this trip, and I could not get away from like the break-off fish.
Because he had the biggest camera and was the slowest.
I think that's probably the case. I think the more electronics you shove on your camera, the more the fish are likely to break off on you. So this photo is me basically kicking away from these like renegade bait fish that were basically clinging to me, and this marlin that basically just kept coming up.
Get your wetsuit data or something.
That might be a good strategy. Good photo. But yeah, basically, I mean, this fish was like probably that close to me, just picking those fish off one after another. But it's probably one of my favorite marlin photos.
Yeah, I think I'll take over and just talk about some of my personal highlights. One of my dreams always as a kid was simply to actually see, like, I had the sport fishing magazines. I saw the underwater photos of these big pelagic species like marlin, mahi, and I just wanted to be that person taking that photo. I didn't realize at the time that almost all of those photos were taken by sport fishermen. They would catch these really gracious, beautiful creatures, wait until they were completely exhausted, still attached to the line, and then a photographer would get in the water and take some photos. So getting to actually see these animals in the wild without us interrupting any of their behaviors was an absolute bucket list trip for me. I love this photo because you can kind of see our whole group with sea lions, see all the marlin in the water. I was just, like I said, a lot of the chaos all the time. We got really lucky. So in other parts of Mexico, they have sailfish migrations. They'll actually have sailfish tours. They're very uncommon in Magdalena Bay. And we were actually on our way out of the boat, out of the water, getting back on the boat. And all of a sudden, this gorgeous thing showed up. Very few photos because it was a very fleeting experience, but you can see how much larger that dorsal fin is, how much darker the fish is. Similar size, this one was probably a good six feet or so. So I'm very happy to at least see one sailfish on this trip. There were a lot of other big highlights for me in particular. We did see Pacific white-sided dolphins a few of the days. One of the days it was a megapod. So I think in the video that we'll show at the end, there's a nice little clip from the surface, from the drone, where you can see just how many dolphins were in that pod, probably several hundred.
That is so cool.
But usually when we get a pod like that, they're hunting, they're feeding. They might come in real quick, check us out, and then they're gone. Well, on this particular occasion, we were kind of sticking close to the coastline, keeping an eye out for whales. And we saw some dolphins. So we decided, let's try and get in and see if they're being friendly today. And this group of 5 dolphins, they were all by themselves, not part of the super pod. They became infatuated with our group. And they hung out and literally played with our group for at least a solid hour. And it was some of the most intimate interactions I've ever had with any wildlife in my life. And just, unfortunately, photos and videos just can't do it justice. This is one of my favorites because you can kind of see the rest of the group, but there was definitely one dolphin in particular that took a liking to us. Staying on the surface, they would come and check you out and swim really fast, and you can kind of keep up, race them a little bit. But if you actually dove down, that's when the experience changed. They became very curious. They would, sometimes they would disappear. And if one of us would actually just dive down, 20, 30 feet underwater and wait, they would just come out of the abyss and come directly to that freediver. So most of this trip, you don't need to be a free diver. You should be comfortable in the water and have some snorkeling capabilities, but you can experience all of it without freediving. But if you do have some freediving skill, the experience is certainly enhanced. I had, that is actually printed in that's our guide there.
So cool.
That's like an amazing. Yeah.
That's my favorite one.
God, I wish I had was of my dive. So it had been maybe 45 minutes or so. I've been just interacting with these dolphins constantly. And they had kind of pieced off for a minute, so we couldn't see them. And I knew they really liked when someone went diving. So I took a couple minutes, got my heart rate down, decided I want to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive. So I went down to, I think it's about 75 feet or so, and just kind of hung out and waited. And when I turned around, there was a dolphin right there. And all the previous dives that I've done, dolphins would come close, check you out. They moved really fast. They were very, very curious, but very playful. On this particular dive, it was different. It was noticeably different. So these dolphins came and surrounded me. At some points, they were so close I could feel them actually surrounded me. And instead of moving fast and kind of evading my eye contact, the one that was the most curious stayed right here. And we locked eyes and they escorted me until I made it to the surface. It was the most, like, I have chills right now. But it was the most powerful experience I've ever had in the water. And I think that's really saying something.
So from everybody else's perspective, the dolphins were trying to take Drew out. So Drew starts going down. And the reason there's no footage is because everyone was concerned. Drew starts going down and two dolphins start basically like corkscrewing around him as he goes down. And there's basically a thermocline where the visibility completely shifts around like 40 feet. Drew and the dolphins disappear through that.
What was Dolphin trying to attack him?
They were trying to trick him, you know? It's like, so I go down to like right above this thermocline and just wait there for as long as I could, and he doesn't come up. And I'm like, Drew's the first known dolphin death. Like, I thought they just took him down forever. And finally, as I come up, Drew starts to arise with both these dolphins corkscrewing him. Like, oh yeah, it was so cool.
That's
to see.
incredible.
But in the moment, all of us were like, well, dolphins took Drew.
And another reason I don't have a lot of, of course I had my camera in my hands, but that's one of those moments where you put the camera down. Yeah. So
As you should.
yeah, unfortunately not a lot of footage, but that's okay. That moment was for me.
Well, I put it down because I was like, blank slide. Okay, so here's Drew with a marlin.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So outside of the water too, I mean, Mag Bay is just one of the most incredible places I've ever seen. I used to think that you have to travel, on a 13-hour flight across the Pacific to see anywhere as incredible as Mag Bay. We got a day where, we did a half day of diving and then went to this incredible mangrove sand dune area that, just sits right outside the bay. So you're getting mountains, the dunes, and mangroves. You're getting these three ecosystems all at once. And it was just absolutely phenomenal. You just walk through and you basically just find like the remnants of the sea. Like when it was up there, you find these extremely, like, I don't know anything about this shell. The fact that it looks amazing. You just find remnants of this stuff all the way through the sand. There's everywhere you look. And then the mangroves there, which you'll see more of in the video coming up. Mangroves are just one of the most absolutely fascinating ecosystems. They're one of the base carbon sinks that we could possibly hope of preserving. So the more light we can shed on like mangroves, the better it is for, carbon and basically like there's a lot of reasons to be fascinated with mangroves.
But the biodiversity there
Yeah.
is largely attributed to the mangroves because it's such a good nursery. And
That's
Fernando
it.
was telling us, actually in Mag Bay, in the mangrove forest there, they have almost all of the mangrove species that can be found around the world. I think with the exception of 2 or 3 in that bay.
That's crazy.
So on top of that, you get a nice little culinary experience if your guys are good. They brought us these chocolate clams and basically prepped them all up. And for me, it was like one of the highlights of the trips. You really get to connect with different cultures in different areas just by, the culinary experience.
Was that the bait fish that was in the ceviche, or
What?
that was not the bait fish that was in the ceviche?
No. So just additional highlights of what you can see in the area. There's humpbacks. Basically, like we go around this time of year, you can see humpbacks. We saw bride's whales. We saw Pacific dolphins. Just gobs of stuff. This is the same dolphin that I thought took Drew to Davy Jones' locker that basically just hung out with us forever. It just shows you how curious they are. I've been privileged enough to be in the water with a lot of dolphins. White-sided Pacific dolphins, for some reason, are just way more curious and just way more willing to hang out with you. And just, I don't know, I feel like this dolphin in general, there's like 5 dolphins. This one kept hanging out and playing with us versus the others were just like, get away from people. Like, please get away from people. Like, you're embarrassing us. And then we had a day where basically we had a whole pod, like, I don't know whether to call a pod, group, whatever, sea lions. They basically scared off all of the marlin. And we just basically got to spend a whole day with them. This was a major highlight for me. It was basically just hanging out with this group of sea lion. I know it's something you like commonly see whenever you go dive, but it's really fun to see him as a group just pick off his bait ball.
Yeah, out in open water and seeing at times upwards of 20 sea lions working together to feed was pretty incredible.
Yeah, so we had a little video put together by one of my buddies who works at the production house I work at. He was kind enough to basically piece all of this together and edit us a nice little video. This isn't all Mag Bay, so this is from, most of it's Mag Bay, some of it's from Cabo, some of it's from Cabo Como, but it's all these areas that were once overfished and overdepleted and are now basically thriving on ecotourism that have all kind of bounced back. You'll see in a second, it kind of speaks for itself.
It's that super pod. They're all dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, it really just shows you the diversity of everything you can see in that area. Like I said, I used to think you'd have to travel all the way across the world to see anything like you see down there. And it's just month after month, it's a completely different thing. Like if you went down there right now, you'd be petting gray whales off the side of the boat. It's yeah, it's just an incredible area. I've really fallen in love with it this past like 2 years, and I probably will keep blowing all my money to just keep going back. It's a great investment.
I think it's worth noting that whole area, pretty much that whole peninsula, is really becoming a little bit more in the spotlight now. There are a lot of communities and locals on the ground that are trying to accommodate the growth in tourism in a very sustainable way. But of course, that is ultimately up to us when we travel there. So make the responsible choices, go with the right outfitters, make sure you ask the right questions so that you know that the money that you're spending down there is going to actually help the local economy. And there's a lot of organizations down there as well that you can always donate to kind of help. There's a few organizations that are actually helping locals develop their natural resources to promote sustainable tourism. So they're actually taking kids, getting them in the ocean, educating them, getting them first aid CPR certified, actually basically training the new generation of guides. So they're trying to keep that very much within that local community. Any questions, I guess? I think we could open that up.
Flip the lights real quick. So
Okay.
police themselves. Did you guys take all of those pictures and video?
Yep.
Just you guys.
You
So
too.
can we give them a round of
A lot of it's just
I will say in the video, the drone footage is this guy, Luke Coley, which apparently if you stay in the dive industry long enough, you will meet him. Like Drew went to Egypt with him, and basically when we got down there, I was like, I know you. And then I was on a shoot a couple of weeks ago and someone saw one of my pictures and they were like, you're with Luke Coley. Like everybody knows this guy. So if you go down there, you'll probably meet him.
There is a question from the Zoom audience. Someone
Okay.
wants to know what camera housing you use.
I've got a Nauticam with a Sony.
There you go.
I also use Nauticam, a Sony A1. I will say if you're going to go down the underwater housing route, don't go cheap. You'll lose a lot of cameras. I don't want to.
Best advice you could give.
Yeah. Stay away from the ike light.
To follow up on Kelly, I was going to say a lot of it is simply being there, being in the water and having the opportunity to capture the photo. And of course, taking out loans to afford the equipment.
That too, but also you can get incredible footage just GoPro. Like our last
Yeah.
trip down in June, Kelly got better video footage than I did in my like housing that cost more than my car.
Yeah,
So you can do just fine with a normal camera.
absolutely. Julie?
When's your next trip?
I'm going to let Amy follow up.
Oh, your son is speaking my language. Well, Julie, thank you for asking. $20 coming your way, girlfriend. So the trip that Drew's guiding, we will have a second trip leader on that one. Hasn't been decided yet, but Drew's for sure going. That is actually a departure probably the day before Thanksgiving of this year. So the last part of November, early part of December. And the way these guys did their trip is a little bit different from how the Ocean First trip is going to be structured. They did theirs more land-based, and the Ocean First trip is going to be on a liveaboard because I don't know how to book a trip like these guys did. I only know how to book the shishi version. So it'll be on a beautiful boat called the Gallant Lady from Nautilus Liveaboards. So it'll be into Cabo. And rather than having to do a land transfer up to Mag Bay, it will be pick up the boat in Cabo and motor. So there'll be lots of opportunities for whale watching, dolphin watching on the transit up. So anybody who's not done a liveaboard before where you have a transit, it's actually one of the best, I think, one of the nicest parts of the whole trip because it's very relaxing and you just don't have to do anything and you can just like watch. So anyway, so it's going to, but but once we get there, the same caliber of crew that Drew and Kellon were working with, and Kelly. Everyone remember Kelly Von Sassafras, by the way? She's here. Yeah, she's here. She was my sidekick for many, many years, helping control the crazy. And, you know, it's, yeah, trying. It's not very good. It's impossible. Anyway, but it's exciting to have Kelly here. She was on the trip with these guys. So once we get to Mag Bay, the same caliber of crew that we're working with Kellon and Drew will be the same people working with our trip. So the local operators who are focused on the ecotourism aspect, it's very important to us here at Ocean First, which I think most of you guys will probably know already. So anyhow, so that's the construct of the trip. It's going to be amazing. We have limited space. It's only 10 spaces on the trip. So if it's something that is intriguing to you, please, let me know. Yeah, Julie.
Is it scuba dive or free dive?
So yeah, good question. It is primarily snorkeling, free dive. There are opportunities to dive as well. There are some shipwrecks along the way. So if people need to get a dive fix in for open circuit, that opportunity is there. The focus though, however, is primarily on the snorkeling and free diving opportunities. Okay, so yeah, so I would say it's probably like 80-20. Or possibly a little bit more shifted towards the snorkeling aspect, because as you can see, open circuit's going to scare the animals away. I've dove on bait balls before with open circuit and it works, but only if there's like so much crazy going on that the animals really don't care. But these type of animals seem to me, not having been there, sadly, that they're a little bit more sensitive to noise.
Do you actually open circuit?
Sorry, scuba versus closed circuit is rebreather. Sorry.
Can you guys touch
Bubbles.
on that part a little bit? What makes freediving like an important experience?
So the ocean doesn't make the noises that your Darth Vader regulator makes normally, and sound travels extremely far underwater.
Luke, I am your father.
There you go.
That's it. That's
So
what I'm talking
basically, whenever you're free diving, you're not making those noises and you're not producing bubbles. So you're way more likely to have a much more intimate experience
Yep.
with the animals.
You can also move quicker while still being very fluid, graceful, and aquatic. So animals perceive you as belonging there.
Yeah.
That intimate encounter with the dolphins, that would not have been possible if I were blowing bubbles.
However, I'll say like with the marlins, just snorkeling at the surface, that's probably the best view of them that you're going to get. You don't need to dive super low to see it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to screw up, like they're coming up from the deep and everything, and like you might mess up that pattern. So you're better off just staying at the surface.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, that too. But you're better off just staying at the surface watching.
Besides, if you want to, be adopted by a dolphin pod, you don't want. You're not
True.
going to know. You're not going to know what to do with your scuba tank once it's all said and done. But maybe they'll teach you how to do it. I mean, it doesn't. It doesn't sound like all that bad way to go.
How long was it free dive when you were down there?
Oh, I have no idea. Probably no more than a minute.
It was over a minute.
Friends were worried for you.
I did at least a 30-second hang waiting for you to come up.
Drew, what's your breath hold?
Stop it.
Yeah, I know. We want to know.
Tell
I
us.
know.
It's not good anymore.
What's your max?
Yeah.
When I wasn't living in Colorado, when I was training on a regular basis, it was about 6.5 minutes.
Holy mother.
Are you kidding?
That's like enough to make an omelet. It's great. That's the things that I think about when I'm hungry.
Jack, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. What did you see in Cabo Pulmo?
Cabo Pulmo was actually Kellon and Kelly. They went there.
Yeah, so we went there right after Mag Bay. It was those big schools of jacks that you saw in the video.
Actually, this fair last week.
It's incredible. Like if you guys have never been to Cabo Pulmo, to me, it's like the staple of also a conservation history. They were kind of the first fishermen to kind of turn guides. And they stopped fishing the area and basically replenished the entire population in there of just giant jackfish. If you ever see like the giant tornadoes of jacks, it's probably Cabo Pulmo. When I was down there, I had quite an awesome experience. We had the schools of jacks and we had humpbacks singing in the background with a dolphin picking off fish as well. And then it's also an amazing place to see bull shark. I know people see orca there. I mean, it's just, I don't know. You get in the water, you're going to see something incredible.
I was actually wanted to see a bull shark, but Olga's attacked the bull shark, so when I was there, there was none.
That, yeah,
The-
that'll do it.
Yeah.
We do have 2 more questions on Zoom, if I can
Okay,
chime in.
yeah.
One is, how long is the Sardine run time, and how, and recording time someone can experience while they're there?
It varies.
October,
Yeah.
Like as early as October and has gone to February.
October to
Um,
February
but
at times.
Going in November and December is probably your best bet.
November to
But
December.
If it's like a really good year, if you have luck, right?
And
Awesome.
I would love to say it's not just because like every time we go out with Fernanda, it's just like we
You
get
find it.
the experience and she acts like we're never going to see it. That's like this rare thing.
Smart.
Like most of the guides kind of act like that. But it kind of seems like it's a pretty sure thing that you
Nice.
will probably get to see these animals if you go.
And what is the water temperature in November to December there?
I think I got 75
75?
on my
Yeah.
calendar.
But sometimes the experience can be different. Like at the beginning of the season this year, they were going out like 40 miles out versus like we were going like maybe 8 to 20. And so they're like the air temperature plays a huge role into the
Okay.
experience.
Mhm.
And once you're out, you have to go to find the action.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
not going to get cold in the water. You're going to get cold in between dives. So you're going to come up, jump on the boat, and if they decide to like motor a mile and you're just in your wetsuit,
Did I mention
Cool.
that I've chartered a yacht?
Oh,
A little bit different, a little bit different.
It is
the way we did it was extremely adventurous. You know, you're on these little fishing boats.
Two different, same, but different, we like to
Yeah.
say.
It is still a pelagic safari, which means
Mhm.
it's largely unpredictable, but you have to put the time in if you want those
Yes, yes,
experiences.
very true, very true.
Awesome.
It's not a gimme.
Any other questions?
So you're gonna do a lot of classes between now and then for freediving?
Absolutely. Yeah. Still have availability in April if anyone's jumping at a bit.
Kelly's got some cards to hand out as well. We'll get you guys on Drew's wait list for when he comes back and.
So where are you headed?
I will be going to Dominica in 2 weeks.
Four.
Personal training for the first time in 4 years.
Wait, where's Dominica?
It's like Southeast Caribbean.
Oh, I mean, we told, I'm not sure what I'm doing so far.
Oh, what are those, Amy?
The Lesser Antilles.
Lesser Antilles.
Yeah, but it's,
Yeah.
so it's kind of far eastern Caribbean.
That's usually where that runs.
A lot of sperm whales there, so send good luck
Yes.
vibes. Yeah. That's still on my list.
Awesome.
Was there any questions?
Sophia Gomez has a house there and she does a lot of freediving.
So
please see her, say hi.
Yep. I hope I
Any
get
other
you.
questions for Drew or Kellon? Okay, I mean, seriously, you guys, do these guys have some amazing photos and stories?
Woo! Thank you.
I mean, I'm so impressed, I'm so impressed, and the stories are just great, and you're right, you gotta play to win, you know, that's the nature of it. So,